Thank you for honestly just giving us another opportunity to present our work and some of our reflections. Let me share my screen 1 second. Also, bear with me. I'm sick for what feels like the 10th time in a month because my 2-year-old just started daycare. So if I cough occasionally, that is why. But anyway, yeah, thank you again for the opportunity. So I wanted to provide some reflections on the SEC roundtable on Monday. And it sounds like you guys are already primed with the video, which is incredible. And I see that there's a sign that says privacy is normal. So, as is no surprise, privacy is a big focus of these discussions, as it should be. So the DRC, for those that are not familiar, we are a nonprofit think tank that focuses on full stack research, education, advocacy, and support of decentralization. And you can think of this word of decentralization in the context of our organization as representing a broad set of values that we believe to be core to the original promise of blockchain, inclusive of censorship resistance, incredible neutrality, and user sovereignty. And on this last point, I think there are a ton of reflections on this idea of user sovereignty from the roundtable. I think Zuko said it best. This isn't necessarily a discussion about privacy or transparency, but of agency. Who controls their data, and what should they be allowed to do with it? So, with that in mind, I think for those that weren't able to watch the whole thing, I would certainly encourage you to just listen to, I guess, the initial 5 minutes of the opening remarks from Paul Atkins, which I think framed the discussion incredibly well. He really focused on what are the stakes here for this discussion. And so I won't read these quotes verbatim, but he touched on this idea that we need to wrestle with a question that's core and profound to American civil liberties, which is whether people can participate in modern finance without surrendering their privacy. He also discussed that there has been a history for the federal government to basically over surveil, and they had this desire for data that expanded into tools that basically posed a risk to these civil liberties. And I for one really appreciated the honesty in that statement. And he also talked about the stakes here are high. The questions before us carry profound and enduring implications. I couldn't agree more. I'll jump into why in some of the subsequent slides, but I'll say also for this industry, the stakes are incredibly high to meet this moment where there is an SEC that is willing to facilitate these types of discussions without really the risk of prosecution for the people that come forth and provide information, and also an administration that's incredibly supportive of this industry. I guess we can't rest on our laurels that will always be the case. That decry the belief that government believes that you can bring a lot of smart people together, you can collect a lot of information, and that the government will somehow provide a perfect solution. And he was saying, that in fact that this is wrong. It's been proven to be wrong. And I will touch on this theme throughout my slides as well. That we need to move beyond discussions to the work of really creating policy frameworks and legislation that's going to protect this industry and ensure that these civil liberties are not impinged upon over time. So what was actually discussed, I'll go through this pretty quickly, but you can read the sub bullets. I think probably a lot of people in this room would be familiar with blockchain's ability to bring transparency. This, like any other technical innovation, brings great benefits, but also some risks. So, if the tool is not also ensuring that people can have privacy in the digital economy, it's going to be a mass surveillance system, which is incredibly concerning and necessitates us getting this right. There was this discussion that privacy shouldn't equal criminality. So people desiring to use privacy preserving technologies should not be by default assume that they're doing anything wrong or trying to obfuscate bad behavior. People have very legitimate reasons for using these technologies. There is a trade-off that was discussed. So PETs can provide selective disclosure, et cetera, but also need to be adequately regulated. They also talked about how markets need privacy to function. This idea on at the top right on a fundamentally American tension, I think is incredibly important, and I really commend Paul for facilitating discussions from all range of people that care about different things in this sub-bullet, from government professionals that are talking about national security to folks that are thinking about market integrity to the people that are building the technology and are trying to, increase freedom and civil liberties. I personally know a broad range of people, from investigators in the government to builders in this space to just researchers providing their sort of academic discipline to some of these very hard questions, and they don't talk to each other enough. And the only way that this tension is resolved, in my opinion, is through not only increased discourse but trying to find a middle ground between the different perspectives. I will go to the next slide. So, very important as well in the roundtable is that there were open questions that policymakers still need to answer. These are unresolved issues. How much data is actually necessary to ensure compliance? What should compliance, or where should compliance attach? So, the argument, in my opinion, shouldn't necessarily be that no one should have regulatory obligations, but it's incredibly important to place those obligations on the right people within this industry, and at the right scope of obligation. There's still a question of what does selective disclosure look like in law, and right now we kind of default to this like complete disclosure regime, which feels antiquated, especially in a digital economy where doing so poses significant risk to users. How do we avoid assuming guilt? To the earlier sort of point I made on privacy doesn't equal criminality. What changes are going to come about in an AI-driven world? So, maybe like this proof of Paul thing is a commonplace in terms of people being able to really prove their identity in a digital sphere. And then what standards enable adoption? What technical standards enable adoption at scale? As I alluded to earlier in that quote from Paul Atkins, we need to move beyond discussion to durable policy. So, though this roundtable surfaced the right questions, these need to be answered by a broad group of people, both private and public, that are collaborating to work towards like meaningful, practical policy frameworks. We need a sustained process, not isolated events. And the path forward, again, requires collaboration, technical research, and people in the space obviously have various technical designs for justifiable reasons, and there needs to be some broader education on why those decisions are made. There needs to be ongoing education for Congress and regulators. I think Monday was a great step towards that, but it's a lot to digest all at once, and through a couple of presentations, it needs to be distilled down into very digestible content in one-pagers that can be brought to the Hill to facilitate these discussions. I emphasize this public-private collaboration built on trust and credibility because, again, both of these sides have to work together, and there needs to be security funding in order, for example, like the crypto sleuths of the world, like the SEAL team, to be able to continue the great work that they're doing, and for it to make sense for them to really do this work to experiment with the government to find, a solution. And lastly, yes, compromise. So I had to make the joke because we're at PGP, but it is likely that we won't get perfect policy, but we should strive for pretty good policy, right? Like not bad policy, and there will be compromises that need to be made. Our approach to the DRC has been going through exactly these steps, going from research to Hill education to a ton of meetings on the Hill where we are providing public comment letters and legislative suggestions when bill drafts come out, and really trying to make sure that there's this tight mapping between a set of values that are core to this industry and making sure those flow into the actual text that shows up in regulation and legislation. And so lastly, I'll just wrap up by saying, we believe a practical way forward is to have this privacy policy coalition, which, we are standing up right now, and would love the support of anyone in this room or anyone that's interested, which, I'll wrap up by just saying thank you. Please reach out if you are interested in this work. I have been going through a lot of reflections as we wrap up the year, and posted this blog that's on the bottom left um, on our website, and I pulled out this quote, which, as a small profit, we consistently punched above our weight, not because of resources, but because of people. Throughout our journey, we have been fortunate to work alongside some of the most thoughtful researchers, builders, lawyers, and policymakers in this space. People motivated not by short-term gain, but by the desire to see these technologies live up to their original promise. And I share this quote to say, a lot of people wrap up with this slide that you can reach out. I truly do mean it. The more the merrier. We really appreciate the contributions from anyone that's really values aligned with our organization. So with that, I will stop my share and just, Paul, thank you again for providing me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Tony. You did just a fantastic job of summarizing the meeting earlier this week. And I've already told you, but I just want to say publicly, I'm on board for the Privacy Policy Coalition. I hope many of you will too. I want to support it in any way I possibly can. If you haven't been to some of their events that they do a nice annual event here in DC. I think they do more elsewhere, and they produce just such substance in their reports and in their recommendations. One of my favorite organizations. So Tony, thank you so much for your work. Please keep it up, and look forward to working with you in the new year.
Thank you, Paul.